Stefan Molyneux, what are you doing here today?
I did a speech on the philosophical origins of the Green Movement because I've known Redmond. I spoke sort of here last year, and this is actually my alma mater. This is where I did my master's, so it's kind of eerie coming back. When you go back to when you are a kid, everything looks like smaller. This looks exactly the same, maybe a little bigger because I've shrunk as I age. But yeah, it's really nice to be back.
Now, how did you get to the point of getting to the point where you want to help people and being so active and starting a podcast and getting to that point of getting yourself out there the way you do?
Well, I mean, I've studied this stuff for years, and I really felt like I had this sort of backsplash of knowledge that I just really wanted to get out there. I sort of had a unique background to it in that I studied arts and acting, and I did playwriting and poetry and novels, so I'm pretty good at writing. I did a lot of public speaking. I was a debater in college, did a lot of public speaking, and in the business world I did a lot of sales and presentations, so I've had a lot of different kind of experience that I think has come together to give me a good skill set for getting the ideas out there. So I really wanted, I think if you're like a doctor in a time of plague, you don't have to help people, but if you're not, you're kind of a douche. So I didn't want to be a douche. I think that's really my business plan. Don't be a douche.
I think that's a respectable business model that should be followed by many. What's on the radar these days? What sort of things do you like to focus on your podcast?
Well, I mean, it's really outreach. So I don't think there's too many people in the libertarian movement who haven't heard of this show, like a Free Domain Radio, and what I'm doing. So I'm really trying to sort of get out to other communities, and so trying to reach out to people who probably haven't had much exposure to philosophy yet. I mean, a lot of people in libertarianism know something about philosophy. They come through Ayn Rand or Murray Rothbard or Mises, and they all have strong philosophical basis. So I'm really trying to find a way to get out to wider communities and talk to them, because there's no limit to how many people can benefit from philosophy, so that's really what I'm focusing on.
And why philosophy as a way to spread your message, or is that just how it should be? Is that the fundamentals?
If it's philosophy, hopefully it's not my message, but good philosophy. Well, critical thinking, rigor in your thinking, working from first principles, that is how you overcome authority, right? So authority is in the world because people are uncertain. And so when you're uncertain, you're like, well, I don't know. Someone's going to tell me what to do. Like, I don't know how to eat, so I go to a nutritionist. So I'm uncertain, and that's good. But in terms of organizing society, how things should work at a fundamental level, how conflicts should be resolved, we'd remain uncertain, and that creates a sort of gravity well for authority to flourish. And so if you teach people critical thinking and reasoning from first principles and evidence, then they're no longer uncertain about how to interact with the world, with each other, how things should be organized, and that pushes authority out of the way. Like in science, there's no government of science that says you can or can't say this or do or don't do this. Everybody who's a scientist knows the scientific method, and therefore they are self-actors when it comes to the pursuit of science. Well, I want to help people become self-actors in the pursuit of virtue, which means teaching them the skills of philosophy, and that will mean we really won't need much of a centralized authority after a while. At least that's the plan.
So the plan is to lead towards less decentralization of power?
If by less you mean no centralization of power, yes. I am all the way to no state. I think that the state is about as archaic as rape and comes from the same moral propositions. And so I am very much for I'm not going to live to see it, I don't think. I mean, unless, I don't know, maybe I freeze myself like Walt Disney and come back to life in a couple hundred years. But the goal is to focus on grinding through the non-aggression principle and a respect for property rights to the point where maybe we don't need this thing at all. Because, no matter how small you make government, all you do is compress it like a spring, and then it just always comes back the moment you stop watching it. Like Ben Franklin said after they signed the Constitution, somebody said, well, what kind of government did you give us? First of all, that's a terrible question. Why should you be given a government at all? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. And as it turns out with the states, they couldn't keep it. The very smallest government in history has now become the very largest, most terrifying and destructive government in history. I think that's a good lesson. I think we can't shrink this cancer because it always comes back. So I think the goal is, in the long run, society without government in the same way we have a society without slavery. It's just a moral step forward that we need to take.
In regards to the slavery analogy, is it more about the fact that things fundamentally need to change now, or is it more about talking about what sorts of things we need to lead towards, or do we know where we need to lead towards?
Well, I mean, the consistent principle, it's ethics is actually kind of simple. Like, the theory behind ethics is tough, but ethics itself is pretty simple. Like, catching a ball is easy. My daughter can do it, but the physics behind catching the ball is tough. Actually, even a dog can do it. So for me, the ethics like don't hit, don't steal, don't assault, don't murder, that's all pretty easy, and I guess with the exception of rape and murder, we talk about that with kindergarten kids, right? Like, don't take other kids' toys, don't push them, don't hit them, that kind of thing. Now, if it's good for 4-year-olds, it must be good for everyone. Otherwise, we're hypocrites, and there are different moral standards for 4-year-olds. If that's true, then we can't have taxation, we can't have national debt, we can't have central banking, we can't have any of these sorts of things because they're violations of non-aggression principle. They are the initiation of force. That's where we want to get to, but it is the biggest change, I think, in human history. And so I believe it's a multi-generational change, but there's specific things that we can do now in terms of spreading non-aggression in our own lives, in our parenting, in our relationships, in our friendships, at work, and also spreading respect for property rights and knowledge about why this kind of change is important. So you act locally, think globally, act locally. So you think about the future, but you act on the principles in the here and now and work to spread them. I think that's the best way to achieve some sort of positive social change that's really going to stick. What we call anarchy, it sounds like some weird foreign thing where you have to end up working out your back muscles throwing a garbage can through a Starbucks window, but the reality is this anarchy is all around us. No central authority tells you who you have to marry or what you have to do for a living, or where you go to school, or what you study, or what books you read, or what movies you go and see. These are all spontaneous, voluntary decisions. There's no central agency which says, this form of breakfast cereal is allowed and this is not. It's just people out there in the market trying stuff and seeing what works, what sticks, what they can sell. So anarchy is all around us. And if you were to come to people and say, the government has to, good God, the divorce rates are 50% or more. And so the government clearly divorce people choosing their own, it doesn't work. So you got to go to the government. Government's going to tell you who you should marry based upon a rigorous scientific analysis of X, Y, and Z. People would be appalled. They'd be like, how could you possibly take away my right to marry who I want to marry? That's appalling. That's fascism. Well, an anarchist feels that way about everything. It's like not the marriage. How you feel about it with marriage, we feel about it when it comes to war or taxation or debt or the economy as a whole or central banking, this massive counterfeiting known as central banking. We feel like that if the government said, here's the job you have to take, and if you don't take that job, you're going to throw in jail. Well, we feel that way about helping the poor and the sick. The fact that the government is going to force you to do stuff is immoral in its nature. So anarchy is not a foreign thing. Anarchy, all we're trying to do is take what 80% of people want 80% of their lives off, and they want 100%, 100%. I mean, just keep going, right?
Are there any things the individual can do, small things on a day-to-day basis, who want to contribute towards this movement, who want to get involved in this cause? What are some things people can do in their own personal lives to get involved?
I think there's really only one thing, which is to send me massive amounts of cash. Massive. Like the kind of cash, even though it's fiat currency, it takes like 9 guys to lift. No, I'm kidding. So yes, I mean, I like to get the money to help spread the word, but the important thing is, study, learn is important. Most importantly, live it in your life. Live voluntarism. Do not be aggressive. Particularly with children, there's this weird conversation you have to have in the 21st century. It's like the 19th century, don't hit your wives was like, well, what do you mean? How else are they going to do what you want them to do? It's like, they're not broken robots. You hit them until they do what you want them to do. We're still having this conversation like, don't hit your children. That's a violation of the non-aggression principle. Reason with your children. I think if children grow up without a fear of and dependence on authority, well, they're going to grow up and they won't really get why we need a state. So if you just say to your kid, don't do this or I'll hit you, well, you haven't taught them anything. You've just taught them fear of authority. And then they grow up and say, well, I have to obey the law because of authority and all that. So I think the way we raise our children is really key to that. The way that we treat people is really key to that. Be the kind of person that someone else wants to be, I guess, is a pretty good way to do it. Mm-hmm. It's a funny thing to say. Like, if you want a free world, be free yourself. If you want a peaceful world, be peaceful yourself. If you want to sell a diet book, don't be this big. Nobody's going to buy it except as a joke. So I think that we live it, we learn it, and we live it. And through that, I think we transmit it almost inevitably.